The ledger was the first thing that caught the archivist's eye, if one can call a blood-brown rectangle of warped calfskin a ledger at all. It had been jammed behind a loose board in the attic of a decaying townhouse on Esplanade Avenue, its spine chewed by insects, its pages puckered from the humidity of 100 Gulf storms. The house was scheduled for demolition. The crew didn't expect to find anything except dust, termites, and the lingering scent of old plaster. But the foreman's shout echoed down the hall, breathless and shaken, as he handed the object to the city historian on site for a last-minute survey. Inside, the writing slanted and curled like the script of a dying man. The entries were sparse at first, expenses, transactions, coded initials. But then the descriptions appeared, one by one, like shallow graves unearthed. The same name repeated across a dozen consecutive pages, ink pressed more forcefully each time, as though the hand that wrote it trembled between desire and dread. Beneath the name lay a sketch, rough, unfinished, yet unmistakably human, and beautiful in a way that made the historian recoil, as if beauty itself had become disfigured by the knowledge of what followed. There were also symbols drawn in margins, circles intersecting with crosses, compass points marked with crescents, crude renderings of eyes, and at the bottom of one torn page, a single line written as though in haste. "The boy is not natural. God forgive me for what I have purchased." No newspaper from the era recorded the events hinted at in those pages. No court ledger reflected the accusations. And yet the notebook spoke of a chain of disappearances, of men who died without explanation, of a family whose fortune rose as suddenly as it collapsed into ruin. It spoke of an auction in 1852, the auction of a young man described as the most beautiful slave ever seen in New Orleans, and of the impossible secret those who bought him tried, desperately, to hide. Before we continue with the story of that auction and the boy whose presence fractured a city's silence, join our community of mystery lovers. Hit subscribe and tell us in the comments which state you're listening from. Your support helps us uncover more forgotten stories like this one. The ledger's final page dated itself to the spring of 1852, when New Orleans, loud, humid, restless, was a city living two lives at once. Along the riverfront, steamboats wailed their arrival, towering like iron-ribbed beasts as they exhaled soot into the sky. Street vendors shouted the day's prices for oranges, oysters, and chicory coffee. Sailors cursed in languages tangled from every corner of the world. The French Quarter pulsed with taverns and music. The Garden District gleamed with the fresh wealth of cotton dynasties, and just beyond those immaculate porches, human beings were bought and sold beneath the same sun that glinted off cathedral domes. The auction yards sprawled across the city like a lattice of bitter commerce. Some were respectable by the standards of the day, wide wooden platforms, shaded by canvas awnings, where buyers murmured their bids in polite tones. Others were cramped courtyards, hidden behind iron gates, where the smell of sweat, river mud, and fear braided together into a scent that could cling to a man's clothes for days. The largest crowds gathered on Chartres Street, near the St. Louis Hotel, whose rotunda echoed with footsteps and whispered calculations. New Orleans in 1852 was a place where wealth and terror dined at the same table. Doctors in starched collars strode past chained coffles of men with bare feet. Priests blessed children at baptism in the morning and walked by the slave pens in the afternoon without lifting their eyes. The law, thick with contradictions, permitted nearly everything so long as coin exchanged hands and power remained undisturbed. That spring was unusually hot. Even long-time residents muttered about the air, how it hung thick as syrup, how the mosquitoes rose in swarms like devouring smoke just after dusk. Newspapers printed warnings about fever outbreaks upriver. Some families fled temporarily to the cooler parishes, leaving their homes under the watch of overseers. Others remained, clinging to their routines, believing the city too blessed and too damned to ever truly change. From the balconies overlooking Royal Street, ladies in yellowing lace fanned themselves while observing the flow of humanity beneath them. Creole merchants, free men of color in fine coats, Irish laborers still smelling of the docks, and always the enslaved, carrying bundles, drawing water, sweeping the stones outside businesses they could never own. The city church bells tolled hours with an authority that seemed almost mocking, for time did not belong equally to every soul within earshot. But beneath this daily pageant, rumors simmered like a forgotten pot on the fire. Some spoke of a shipment arriving in secret at night, unloaded without registry. Others swore they heard cries from a warehouse near the river, cries that did not sound entirely human. A few whispered, in tones meant only for close friends, that a certain family had paid an impossible sum for a boy unlike any other, a boy whose appearance unsettled even seasoned traders. These whispers drifted through the taverns like ghosts too weary to take form. Most dismissed them as nonsense. New Orleans birthed a new rumor every hour, it seemed, and devoured it by sundown. Yet the story persisted, growing stranger with each retelling, like an infection that refused to die. The city itself felt complicit in the tale, for New Orleans in that era thrived on secrets. Behind shuttered windows and heavy drapes, Creole families hid scandals that could have ruined their lineage. In the courtyards, slaves exchanged stories in hushed Creole French about spirits that guarded or punished, depending on the moon. And in the cemeteries, where the tombs rose like stone ships above the marshy earth, root workers left offerings for the dead in hopes of protection from whatever darkness prowled the humid nights. The social order was fragile, built upon 1,000 unspoken rules. Free people of color walked a tightrope between privilege and peril. Wealthy planters mingled with European aristocrats who found the city's decadence irresistible. And everywhere, the line between the living and the dead felt thin, blurred by fever, superstition, and the strange geography of a place perpetually sinking into its own soil. Into this elaborate, uneasy world came the boy described only as Armand in the surviving records. His arrival would fracture families, ignite silent wars between powerful men, and sow fear even among those who believed themselves immune to horror. But in the spring of 1852, no one yet knew what his presence would demand of them. No one knew what price would be paid for beauty so flawless it seemed forged by something not entirely mortal. For now, there was only the heat, the river's slow churn, and the first quiet murmurs of a secret too large to remain contained. The first person whose life would be permanently bent around the arrival of the mysterious young man was Julien Desmarais, a broker of flesh, favor, and fortunes. He was a thin man, almost eel-like, with a narrow face that seemed carved to hold secrets. His hair, once black, had begun to silver at the temples, giving him the false dignity of a statesman rather than the reality of a man who spent his days assigning prices to human souls. His office on Chartres Street smelled perpetually of pipe smoke, citrus oil, and damp ledgers, scents that clung to him wherever he walked. Julien spoke softly, not out of kindness, but because quiet men were harder to read. Those who knew him claimed he rarely raised his voice, even when angered. Instead, he let silence do the work. "There is nothing more persuasive," he once told a nervous young buyer, "than the space between words. It makes the other man reveal what he hoped to hide." The buyer had nodded eagerly, unaware that Julien was studying him the entire time, noting every twitch, every swallow, every hint of hesitation. Despite his reputation, Julien lived modestly in a townhouse near the river, its shutters perpetually half-closed as if to keep its owner from being fully seen. He walked the streets as though listening to some private rhythm beneath the city's noise. Even his closest associates admitted they could not say what he feared, what he desired, or what he believed. All agreed on one point: he was not a man easily shaken. But in late May of 1852, a visitor from Havana entered his office and closed the door behind him. and when the men emerged an hour later, Julien's face had gone pale. "You will handle the acquisition?" the visitor asked, his Spanish accent sharp as the edge of a blade. Julien wet his lips before answering. "If the description is accurate," he murmured, "then the city will tremble." The visitor's reply came colder than the shadow he cast on the threshold. "It already has." The second life drawn irrevocably into the orbit of the mysterious young man belonged to a woman whose name seldom appeared in official records, though her influence stretched into every corner of the city's Creole elite. Camille Laroche was the widow of a riverboat magnate, and her beauty, once celebrated in polite society, had hardened into something sharper, like a statue whose marble surface had cracked with age, but not with fragility. Her dresses were immaculate, her posture impeccable, and her eyes the particular pale gray that suggested storms gathering far out at sea. Camille kept a salon in her mansion on Britannia Street, where the air smelled of sandalwood, rosewater, and the faintest hint of opium. Politicians, lawyers, and foreign merchants gathered in her parlor to drink coffee thick as river mud and speak of matters the newspapers dared not print. She listened more than she spoke, and when she did interject, her words fell with the finality of a judge's verdict. One evening, as the heat pressed against the windows like a living thing, Camille stood beside her nephew Felix, a wiry young man with nervous hands. He had just returned from a trading expedition along the Gulf. He had brought rumors with him, rumors of a private sale, unlike any the city had seen. "You exaggerate," Camille said, though her voice betrayed a curiosity she rarely allowed. She watched the smoke rise from her candle as if divination might be found in the wavering flame. Felix shook his head. "A Spaniard brought word. He said the boy is, well, unnatural in appearance, too perfect. He said even the traders refused to speak of him openly." Camille turned, her face unreadable. "Beauty has undone many men," she said. "Do not let it cloud your judgment." "I saw the effect myself," Felix insisted. Hardened buyers were unsettled. One man claimed he dreamed of the boy days before seeing him, dreamed of eyes he could not escape. Camille's breath caught, almost imperceptibly. "Dreams," she said, her tone clipped, "are the refuge of weak minds." But when Felix left the room, she remained standing in the quiet, her fingers pressed to the silk of her bodice, as though steadying her heartbeat. Those closest to her, few as they were, knew Camille well enough to recognize the subtle fissure in her composure. Something in the rumor had touched a memory, a fear, or perhaps an ambition she had long buried beneath her carefully cultivated poise. The final figure whose path converged with Armand's belonged to a woman who, on the surface, had no business standing among the powerful. Celestine, a free woman of color in her late 20s, worked as a seamstress in one of the city's busiest dressmaking houses. Her hands were small and agile, her stitches impossibly fine, and society women often insisted she alone craft the lace that would lie against their skin. Her eyes held a quiet intelligence, her posture a pride not easily crushed. She had grown up in the Tremé district, surrounded by music and storytelling. Her mother had whispered to her of spirits, ancestors, dreams that carried warnings. Celestine never repeated such tales in public, for she knew how quickly white mouths twisted them into mockery. But within her was a reservoir of old knowledge, songs older than the stones of St. Louis Cathedral, fears older than the plantations that fed the city. She first heard whispers of the beautiful young man while fitting a gown for one of Camille Laroche's acquaintances. The woman, flushed from wine and gossip, laughed as she recounted the rumor. "They say he looks like a creature from Eden," she told Celestine, lifting her arms as the seamstress adjusted the bodice. "Imagine that. Paradise sold at auction like livestock." Celestine kept her face serene, though a chill traced her spine. "People talk too much in summer heat," she replied gently. The woman smirked. "Well, this talk came from Julien Desmarais himself. He expects buyers to fight over the boy. Claims even he is unsettled by him. She paused as Celestine tugged a thread tight. Do you think that's possible? A slave so beautiful he can unnerve the wicked? Celestine looked down, her voice low enough to vanish beneath the rustling fabric. Anything that disturbs the wicked, she said, is worth fearing. When the woman left, Celestine remained in the workroom long after her colleagues departed, her fingers frozen above a half-finished hem. She could not explain why, but a deep unease coiled in her chest. She felt, though she dared not admit it even to herself, that the city was holding its breath, waiting for something to emerge from the river's shadow. None yet knew what role they would play. None yet knew that Armand's arrival would unravel their certainties, expose their secrets, and draw them toward a darkness older than the city itself. The first signs came softly, as most true horrors do, not with thunder, but with a disturbance barely strong enough to ripple the surface of daily life. In the oppressive heat of early June, when the river mist clung to the ankles of morning passers-by and mosquitoes whined like invisible needles, the city began to murmur. At the docks, a group of longshoremen unloading crates from a Havana vessel paused when one of the sailors crossed himself 3 times in rapid succession. He muttered in Spanish, voice quivering, refusing to step back onto the ship's lower deck. A foreman barked at him, but the man only shook his head, saying the darkness below breathed too close to him. When pressed, he whispered about a passenger. No, not a passenger, a cargo, whose presence made the air taste like metal. The foreman scoffed, yet he admitted later that the man's eyes held the same wild shine he'd once seen in fever wards during yellow scourges. 2 days later, Julien Desmarais summoned an assistant to accompany him to a private holding house near the edge of the Marigny district, a place where wealthy buyers sometimes requested discreet viewings. The assistant returned alone just after dusk, pale and tight-lipped. When another clerk asked whether the new acquisition, rumored to be the extraordinary boy, had arrived, the assistant responded only with, "Do not ask me, not tonight." He did not come back to work the next morning. Neighbors reported strange lights flickering in Julien's townhouse that night, though the broker himself was nowhere to be seen. A servant swore she heard footsteps pacing the upper floor, followed by a voice, male, low, melodic, speaking a language she could not identify. When she crept toward the sound, the entire house fell silent, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Celestine, meanwhile, encountered her own warning. Her aunt, who lived 2 streets away in a narrow house draped in jasmine vines, woke from a nightmare screaming Celestine's name. When the seamstress visited the next morning, her aunt clutched her wrist with surprising strength. "There is something coming," the old woman whispered, her breath smelling of mint tea and fear. "Something wearing the shape of a man. You must not look into his eyes." Celestine attempted to soothe her. "Auntie, it is only the heat. Dreams swell like tides this time of year." "No," her aunt's voice cracked. "This dream was not mine. It was sent." Celestine gently pried her aunt's fingers away, but the words burrowed into her like burrs. She found herself glancing at every stranger's face on the walk home, as though danger might hide behind a smile. Camille Laroche received her own omen in a more refined, yet equally unsettling form. She was preparing for one of her weekly salons, a gathering she called conversation evenings, though they often became arenas for quiet power games, when she noticed a guest lingering near her parlor door. It was Dr. Alphonse Reynaud, a respected physician known for his skepticism toward everything save cold reason. He stood motionless, staring at the ornate mirror above Camille's fireplace. She walked toward him, silk hem trailing. "Doctor, is something amiss?" Reynaud blinked, seeming to awaken from a trance. "Forgive me," he said, adjusting his spectacles. "For a moment, I thought I saw someone standing behind me." Camille looked into the mirror. The room reflected flawlessly, empty except for the two of them. "A trick of the candlelight," she offered. "No," he murmured. "No, the shape was too clear. A young man, beautiful, and watching me." Camille's pulse stumbled. She kept her tone steady. "Perhaps you are overtired, doctor." "Perhaps," he conceded. But he did not enter the salon. He took his coat and departed without another word. The city's unease sharpened further when a small boy was found near the levee just after dawn, shivering despite the heat, his eyes wide with terror. He claimed he had seen someone walking along the riverbank in the night. "He was shining," the child whispered to his mother, clinging to her skirts. "Like he had light inside him, like a candle in his skin." When adults pressed for an explanation, the boy insisted the figure's face was too perfect, and that when it turned toward him, he heard a sound like wind rushing through a broken flute. The adults dismissed it as a child's imagination, but one woman, an elderly washerwoman who had lived in New Orleans longer than most, crossed herself and muttered, "That is not a man. That is a sign." Rumors bled into one another, forming a tangle of fear too complex to ignore. And through it all, Julien Desmarais moved like a shadow among shadows, his composure thinning with each passing day. The morning he finally reopened his Chartres Street office, his hands shook as he unlocked the door. Clerks exchanged glances but dared not comment. When Julien sat at his desk, he stared at the wall as if something pressed against the other side of it, waiting. Late that afternoon, Felix Laroche arrived unannounced, his coat damp with sweat. He leaned close to Julien's desk. "Is it true?" Felix whispered. "The boy, they say he may be shown soon." Julien's silence was long enough to fray nerves. At last he said, "Yes, but you must take care, Felix. This acquisition is not like others." Felix swallowed. "What do you mean?" Julien leaned forward, his voice barely audible. I looked at him, only for a moment. "And?" Julien's eyes glimmered with something raw, fear, awe, or a combination of both. "I felt," he said, "as if I were being judged." The words clung to Felix all night like humidity on skin. And across the city, Celestine sat awake by candlelight, needle untouched, while the echo of her aunt's warning circled her mind. Camille Laroche stared into her parlor mirror long after her guests had left, waiting, against all reason, for the reflection to shift. The whispers grew louder with each sunset, threading themselves into conversations, dreams, and the air itself. Something had arrived in New Orleans, something that bore the shape of a young man and the beauty of a fallen angel. And though no one yet dared say it aloud, every soul who sensed his presence felt the same quiet dread settling over the city. The dread of a story beginning. Fear in New Orleans rarely announced itself with shouts. It spread like mold, slow, persistent, blooming in corners where no one cared to look, until the rot was too deep to ignore. By mid-June of 1852, that rot had reached the drawing rooms of the elite, the taverns of the working class, the prayer benches of church pews, and the whispered networks of those who lived their lives under the yoke of bondage. Every strata of the city felt it, though each interpreted the creeping dread in their own language. It began with the buyers. These were men accustomed to evaluating bodies with clinical detachment, broad shoulders, good teeth, obedient posture, men who believed they had seen all that flesh could offer and all that suffering could produce. But one after another, the wealthiest of them approached Julien Desmarais in private, demanding a preview of the boy whispered to be more valuable than any human property auctioned that year. They came to his townhouse on nights so humid the gas lamps flickered like dying hearts. They stepped into the narrow front parlor clutching kerchiefs, wiping sweat from the creases of their necks. They waited with feigned impatience while Julien stood motionless before the stairway, palms pressed together as if in prayer. The first night, he allowed one man, Jacques Fournier, a plantation owner from St. Charles Parish, to see the boy. Fournier descended the stairs 15 minutes later. His face was white, not with disgust or indecision, but with a pallor that reminded Julien of men who survived shipwrecks only to remain haunted by phantom waves. Julien stepped forward. "Your thoughts?" Fournier swallowed, struggling to speak. "I came prepared to make an offer." His voice trembled. "But I cannot. Julien's eyes narrowed. "Do you object to his condition? His health?" "No." Fournier looked toward the window, though his gaze seemed directed inward, toward some memory unwelcome and fresh. "There is nothing wrong with him. That is what frightens me." He departed without another word. The second night, 2 brothers from Natchez asked for a viewing. Only one returned down the stairs. When asked where the other had gone, the surviving brother pointed upward with a shaking finger and whispered, "He is kneeling beside the boy. I cannot make him stand." Julien hurried upstairs to find the man indeed on his knees, staring at Armand with a slack-jawed expression of worshipful terror. Julien spoke his name sharply. The man did not react. It took the combined strength of 3 servants to drag him away from the boy's chamber. He clawed at the air as if trying to grasp something Julien could not see. When the brothers left, Julien bolted the stairway door and did not permit another viewing for 4 days. By then, rumors had seeped well beyond the men of wealth. In the St. Louis Cathedral, Father Dupuis found his confessional line filled with parishioners muttering about visions. An elderly man insisted he'd seen an angel walking along the edge of the river, an angel with no shadow. A young woman swore she felt a presence in her bedroom at night, standing over her bed, beautiful and sorrowful. A fisherman confessed he dreamed of a boy with luminescent eyes who whispered in a language older than prayer. Father Dupuis dismissed these accounts as fever dreams, heat delirium, or imagination twisted by gossip. Yet when the church emptied and twilight thickened behind the stained glass saints, he knelt alone beneath the altar and whispered a plea, "Lord, if something walks among us, let it not be the deceiver wearing the mask of your creation." His voice echoed faintly through the cavernous nave. For a moment, he thought he heard an answer, soft, melodic, almost human. In the Trem district, Celestine found her aunt waiting at the window each evening, gripping her rosary beads so tightly the wooden crucifix left dents in her palm. "Did you hear?" her aunt whispered one night. A girl from Dauphine Street fainted after looking at a stranger who passed her door. They say he smiled at her, just smiled, and she dropped like a stone. Celestine shook her head. Stories grow teeth when people are frightened. Her aunt tightened her grip. "This is not superstition, child. The spirits tremble, the air trembles." Celestine tried to laugh, but the sound died before leaving her throat. She thought of Julien's pale-faced buyer, of the vanished assistant, of the boy found by the levee speaking of shining skin. She thought of her own dreams, the ones she hadn't told anyone. Dreams of a face half seen, bathed in moonlight, its features so perfect they made her chest ache. Dreams of a voice she could not understand, calling to her from a distance, too close to be safe. Camille Laroche, meanwhile, found her mansion transformed into a nest of uneasy whispers. Servants claimed they heard footsteps in the halls at night, light, almost floating. One chambermaid insisted she saw a reflection in a mirror that did not match her own. It was the face of a young man standing directly behind her, though the room itself was empty. Camille summoned her housemaid, Claudette, into the dining room and interrogated her with the precision of a magistrate. "You are certain?" Camille asked, her voice perfectly controlled. "Yes, madame." Claudette wrung her hands. "He was behind me, smiling, but not kindly." Camille inhaled slowly. "Describe him." Claudette hesitated. He was Beautiful. The word hung in the air like incense too sweet to bear. Camille dismissed the maid with a wave, but remained seated long after the door closed. Her fingers traced the rim of her wine glass. Beauty, she murmured. Beauty can be a spell. Later that night she walked alone into her parlor and stood before the large gilded mirror that had unnerved Dr. Renaud days before. She stared into her own reflection, searching every shadowed corner. For an instant, just an instant, she saw another face beside hers. A young face. A perfect one. She did not gasp. She did not scream. Camille Laroche, for all her iron composure, did something far stranger. She leaned toward the mirror and whispered, "What do you want?" No answer came, but the room grew colder. The tension in the city reached its breaking point on a night when thunder threatened but did not come, the sky swollen with unshed storms, the air electric. Julien Desmarais, gaunt from sleepless nights, summoned 3 men for an emergency meeting: Dr. Renaud, Camille's nephew Felix, and a legal clerk named Matthew Dupré, who handled the discreet paperwork of wealthy families. The 4 met in Julien's office on Chartres Street. The room was lit by a single oil lamp, its flame wavering in the oppressive heat. Julien closed the shutters, then the door, then drew the bolt with shaking fingers. When he turned to face them, his composure had cracked so severely that even Felix, still youthful in mind, recoiled. Felix spoke first. "You look ill." Julien ignored him. "Gentlemen, Madame Laroche," he paused. "What I am about to show you must not leave this room." Dr. Renaud crossed his arms. "We are not children frightened of shadows. Say what you must." Julien retrieved a folded sheet of paper from his desk. His hand trembled as he opened it. "This," he said, voice barely audible, "is the bill of sale for the boy." Felix leaned closer. "Then the rumors are true?" Julien nodded. "He arrived under a false manifest, transported from Havana in conditions I cannot speak of without violating several laws. The document is incomplete because—" His throat tightened. "Because no one who handled him in transit would remain long enough to finish it." Dr. Renaud frowned. "Nonsense. Sailors are superstitious, but not cowards." Julien lifted his eyes slowly, and the room chilled. They were not afraid of disease or rebellion or punishment. His voice grew hoarse. They were afraid of him. Felix looked from man to man. "You speak as if he is not human." Julien exhaled shakily. "I assure you, he is flesh and blood. But there is something else, something that makes wise men falter and hardened men tremble." Dr. Renaud scoffed. "You succumb to hysteria. A beautiful youth cannot drive reason from sensible minds." Julien opened his mouth, then froze. His eyes fixed on the corner of the room, on a shadow that none of the others had noticed. His face drained of color. "Do you see him?" he whispered. Felix turned quickly. "See who?" Julien pointed, hand trembling violently. "There, by the cabinet." Dr. Renaud stepped forward. "There is nothing there." But Julien staggered backward until his spine struck the wall. His breathing grew ragged. "He is here," he gasped. "He is listening." The lamp flickered. The men exchanged terrified glances. Felix broke the silence. "Julien, what did you see upstairs? When you looked at him?" Julien pressed a hand to his chest as though steadying something inside. "I saw a boy who should not exist. A boy whose face, God forgive me, felt like temptation carved from divine light. He looked at me, and I felt as though he were peeling away everything I have ever hidden, every lie, every cruelty, every—" A sharp knock shattered the moment. All 4 jerked toward the door. Julien's voice cracked. "Do not open it." But the knock came again, soft, almost polite. Felix, trembling, stepped forward and pressed his ear to the wood. "Who is it?" he whispered. Silence. But then a voice answered, a young voice, melodic, unmistakably beautiful. "You already know," the voice said. Felix stumbled back so fast he nearly fell. Dr. Renaud paled, his skepticism evaporating in an instant. Matthew Dupre crossed himself repeatedly, whispering a prayer under his breath. Julien's gaze locked on the door, his expression twisted with dread and reverence. His lips parted as though he might speak, but no words came. The lamp dimmed once more. And in that dimming, it became terribly clear that whatever waited beyond the door did not knock to enter. It knocked to warn. "What do you think? Guilty souls cursed by God, or victims of madness? Tell us below. Your theories matter here." A low, rising hum filled the air, so faint at first that the men thought it was only their quickened breath echoing in the small room. But within seconds, the sound deepened, vibrating through the floorboards like the distant turning of a massive wheel beneath the earth. The knock did not come again. The silence that followed was worse. Julien pressed himself against the wall, trembling so violently his teeth clicked. His pupils were blown wide, swallowing the color of his irises. Felix backed toward the far corner, hands out as if to ward off an invisible fire. Matthew Dupre crouched beside the desk, muttering a prayer in fractured Latin, the words running together into incoherent pleas. Only Dr. Renaud forced himself forward, his jaw clenched, his breath sharp with fear and fury. "This is delusion," he whispered, voice trembling despite his efforts. "Mass hysteria, nothing more. Open the door and you will see. Just an empty hall." "No," Julien rasped. "He stands there, waiting." "How do you know?" Renaud shot back. Julien closed his eyes. "Because he can see us, even through the wood." A gust of wind moved under the door. Impossible, unnatural, cold as water drawn from a graveyard well. The lamp's flame elongated, thin as a needle. The men stared, wide-eyed. And then came the smell. Not rot, not smoke, not anything human. A scent like rain falling on heated stone, mingled with something sweet, a sweetness just on the edge of decay. Camille Laroche would later describe that smell with a shudder, as if a flower had bloomed where no sun, no soil, no God ever belonged. Julien collapsed to his knees. "Please," he whispered hoarsely, "please go back upstairs. Please, leave us." The hum subsided. The cold faded. And the presence, whatever it was, moved away from the door. Footsteps, soft as falling ash, ascended the staircase to the upper floor. For a moment, the men heard them clearly. Then they did not. Silence reclaimed the townhouse like a returning tide. Felix finally spoke, voice breaking. We cannot keep him here." "No," Julien agreed, still kneeling. "We cannot keep him anywhere." In the days that followed, the city's tension snapped one thread at a time, unraveling into chaos beneath the veneer of normal life. But the unraveling began, unmistakably, with Julien Desmarais. Clerks arriving one morning found the office door ajar, papers scattered, ink bottle overturned. Julien was seated at his desk, fully dressed, hands folded, not asleep, not dead, but staring straight ahead as though he'd been emptied of everything except breath. Matthew Dupre touched his shoulder. "Monsieur Desmarais." Julien blinked, then turned his head with the slow, stiff motion of a marionette. "He dreams through me now." Matthew recoiled. "Who?" Julien smiled, serene, ghostly. "The boy. Armand. He dreams, and I witness." He stood abruptly, walked past them, and left the office without another word, answered in a voice not wholly his own. He is not meant to be seen by men. He is a mistake in the order of the world. The fisherman fled. Julien answered in a voice not wholly his own. He is not meant to be seen by men. He is a mistake in the order of the world. The fisherman fled. Julien remained. Camille Laroche received a letter the next morning, hand-delivered by a trembling courier. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakably Julien's, though the strokes seemed altered, as if the writer's hand had been guided by another will. Madam, the boy will not be contained. Not by walls, not by chains, not by laws. What he carries inside him is older than the land we stand upon. Do not seek him. Do not look upon him again. It is too late for me. I have already seen too much. J.D. Camille crushed the letter between her fingers, her heartbeat quickening. She walked to her parlor mirror and stared into its depths, seeking what she feared and fearing what she sought. Her reflection stared back. Alone. For the moment. Celestine was threading pearls onto a gown when her aunt burst through the shop door, panting, eyes wild. "He was in my dream again," her aunt gasped. "The shining boy. He walked across a floor of water. He called your name." Celestine's hands froze above the gown. "My name?" she whispered. "Yes." Her aunt gripped her shoulders. "He will seek you, and you must not answer." Celestine tried to speak, but could not. She felt suddenly as though someone else stood behind her, breathing lightly against her neck. She turned. Nothing there. The seamstress excused herself early, claiming illness. But deep down, she knew it was not her body that trembled. It was the world. Word spread that Julien intended to present Armand at a private auction scheduled for the end of June, an event intended to avoid public scrutiny and attract only the wealthiest bidders. But as the day neared, strange accidents multiplied. A buyer's carriage overturned without cause. A housemaid in the Marigny went blind overnight. A priest collapsed during Mass, claiming he'd seen wings, vast pale wings, unfurl behind the altar. And then, the most chilling incident of all. A young man who'd worked aboard the Havana vessel that brought Armand to New Orleans was found wandering near the old Batteur, dazed and barefoot. His clothes were torn, his body scratched as if he'd fled through bramble. When a patrolman asked what happened, he whispered, "He followed me into my dreams. He walked across the water, beautiful as dawn, terrible as judgment." "Who?" the patrolman pressed. The sailor looked at him with hollow eyes. "The boy." He fell silent and never spoke again. On the eve of the auction, Camille Laroche received an invitation from Julien, handwritten, urgent. "You must come tonight. All must be confronted. Bring no one else." Against her servant's pleas, she went. She entered the townhouse at twilight. The hall was lit by only one candle. The air smelled faintly of rain on stone. From upstairs came a single, melodic voice. A young voice. Singing. Camille's breath caught. The melody did not belong to any human tradition. It rose and folded in on itself, tender, sorrowful, impossible. As she ascended the stairs, the song grew clearer, resonating through the walls like the echo of a cathedral submerged under water. She reached the landing. The boy stood at the end of the hallway. Armand. He wore a plain linen shirt, bare feet on the wooden floor. His face, God help her, was perfect in a way that unsettled the bones. His skin seemed to hold light beneath its surface, like alabaster warmed by the sun. His eyes were not just beautiful, they were knowing in a way no human eyes had right to be. "Madame Laroche," he said softly. Her knees nearly buckled. "Who are you?" she managed. The boy tilted his head. "Someone who should not have been born." "Julian believes you are dangerous." A faint, aching smile touched his lips. "I am not dangerous by intent." "Then how?" Camille whispered. Armand stepped closer, the air shifting with him. "Because beauty, when it reaches beyond human measure, becomes a blade." Camille stared, trembling. He lifted a hand, a gesture tender, strangely mournful, and the candle at the far end of the hall extinguished itself, as though bowing before him. "You see what happens," Armand murmured. "Men paint their desires on me. They kneel, they weep. They call me angel, they call me curse. But I am neither. I am only wrong." "Wrong?" Camille echoed. "Made in error," he said. "A symmetry too precise, a face too complete, and in that completeness, humans find their own fractures." Camille swallowed hard. "What do you want?" Armand stepped nearer. She felt his presence ripple the air like heat rising from coals. "I want release," he whispered, "and I want forgiveness." "For what?" His eyes darkened. "For existing." Behind them, footsteps sounded, heavy, uneven. Julian emerged from a doorway, face gaunt, eyes fever-bright. "Do not listen to him," Julian rasped. "He is not innocent. He is—" Armand turned. Julian dropped to his knees as though struck by an unseen force. His hands clawed at his chest. Camille cried out, rushing forward, but Armand raised a hand and she froze in place, not by restraint, but by awe so profound it stole motion from her limbs. Julian choked. You showed me everything I ever did." Armand knelt beside him, expression unbearably gentle. "I showed you only your truth," he whispered. "You hid cruelty in numbers and ink. You sold lives with cold hands. You feared no judgment. So I became your mirror." Julian shuddered. Tears streamed down his face. "Kill me," he begged. Armand shook his head. "I cannot kill, but you may let yourself fall." Julian closed his eyes. And then, slowly, quietly, he stopped breathing. Camille screamed. Armand rose, face sorrowful beyond comprehension. "He freed himself," he murmured. "I did not touch him." Camille backed away, shaking violently. "You cannot remain here. The city, God, the city will tear itself apart." Armand looked at her with aching calm. "It already has." The floorboards creaked. A gust of cold wind spiraled through the house. Camille steadied herself against the wall. "What are you?" Armand considered the question, then offered a fragile, heartbreaking answer. "I am what happens when perfection arrives where it does not belong." The candle nearest her flickered, and then went out, leaving them in darkness, illuminated only by the faint glow beneath the boy's skin. This was the moment, the turning point upon which every whispered horror, every rumor, every tremor of dread hinged. The moment New Orleans confronted not a demon, not an angel, not a monster, but something far more terrifying. A mistake of beauty, a mirror of human sin, a being that revealed the rot beneath society's elegant veneer. And the night was just beginning. If you stood in that room, would you call it crime or sacrifice? Leave your answer. The storm broke before dawn, not in the sky, which remained swollen and eerily silent, but in the city itself. Word of Julien Desmarais' sudden death spread with the speed and precision of a knife thrown by an expert hand. The details were inconsistent. One rumor said he collapsed from apoplexy. Another claimed he leapt from his balcony. Another insisted he died whispering in a foreign tongue. Strangely, each version contained the same strange addition: that someone had been seen walking away from the townhouse just moments before Julian was found. A young man, barefoot, beautiful. The police were summoned, though few truly wished to enter Julian's residence. The superintendent, flush-faced, sweating, perpetually overwhelmed, sent 2 patrolmen to investigate. They approached the building as though it were a quarantined hospital during a fever outbreak, touching nothing unless absolutely required. Inside, they found Julian's body laid out with surprising reverence on the drawing room carpet. His expression was peaceful, too peaceful for a man who'd allegedly died of stroke or fright. His hands were folded neatly, as if someone had arranged them after death. No sign of struggle, no markings on his skin, no natural explanation. One patrolman, a veteran of 20 years, murmured, "I've never seen a corpse look relieved." The younger man replied, voice cracking, "It's like he died finally telling the truth." They searched the house. They found no intruder, no sign of forced entry, only the faint scent of something sweet, like a flower crushed beneath moonlight, and a lingering cold that made both men wrap their arms across their chests despite the June heat. They sealed the townhouse, but that did little to stop the wildfire. By midday, crowds gathered in clumps along Chartres Street. Women pressed handkerchiefs to their lips. Men whispered behind gloved hands. Slaves exchanged worried glances, their fears sharper than anyone else's, for they knew better than most how the powerful reacted when terrified. The newspapers moved with predictable cruelty and speed. The New Orleans Crescent ran a discreet, sanitized headline. Local broker found dead in his home, foul play possible. The Picayune, more shameless, printed a larger headline by evening. Mysterious death of Desmarais, strange figure seen fleeing scene. Only the Daily Delta dared mention the whispers. Unidentified youth rumored at heart of incident, authorities urge calm. None named the boy outright. None mentioned the sale. None described the beauty that had driven men to their knees. But between the lines, every New Orleanian could read the truth. Something unnatural had moved among them. On the riverfront, men spat over their shoulders and muttered about omens. In the French market, women selling herbs crossed themselves whenever a stranger passed. In Trem, old women lit candles at dusk, not to saints, but to spirits older than Christ. And all the while, Armand's name traveled silently from ear to ear, like a psalm recited in reverse. Camille Laroche withdrew from public view. Her household shuttered its windows. Servants whispered that their mistress had not slept since the night Julien died. Some claimed they heard her pacing the halls in the dark. Others insisted they saw her speaking softly to her parlor mirror, as though negotiating with something trapped inside its glass. Felix tried to visit her. A footman turned him away. "My mistress is indisposed," he said, voice trembling. "Indisposed how?" Felix pressed. The servant swallowed. "She keeps asking if perfection can kill a man without touching him." Felix left with dread curdling in his stomach. Celestine, meanwhile, saw the city's unraveling reflected in her customers. Society women arrived at the dress shop with tremors in their hands. One refused to sit beneath any mirror. Another begged Celestine to remove the decorative pearl buttons from her bodice because they reflect too clearly. A third woman stopped mid-fitting, staring past Celestine's shoulder. "What is it?" Celestine whispered. "I thought—" The woman shivered. "I thought I saw someone behind you." Celestine turned, heart hammering. No one. But the air felt colder. Her aunt's warnings came back to her in a rush. "He will seek you." When the coroner filed Julian's official death record, he listed the cause as cardiac failure, but when he returned home that night, he told his wife the truth. "I held his body in my hands," he said, trembling. His heart did not fail, it fled. He refused to say more. And finally came the moment that sealed the city's terror. 3 days after Julian's death, a group of businessmen arrived at the St. Louis Hotel, the very place where, under ordinary circumstances, Armand would have been displayed for auction. They gathered in the grand rotunda beneath frescoes of cherubs and laurel wreaths, arguing over the canceled sale. A tall man in a white linen suit slammed his cane against the tiled floor. "We paid deposits. We were promised a viewing. Now Desmarais is dead and the boy has vanished. This reeks of conspiracy." Another man snapped. "What boy? No manifest lists him. No ledger names him. I spoke to the customs office. They deny any such import." "Oh, he existed," the first man snarled. "I saw him once. A glimpse. Enough to damn me with longing." A hush fell. The men turned. 2 priests stood at the entrance to the rotunda, their faces grave. One spoke. "The Archbishop has prohibited further inquiry into the matter." "What authority do you have over a private sale?" one buyer challenged. "The kind," the priest said softly, "that protects the city from a presence not meant for the living." The businessmen stared in horror. The priest lowered his gaze, voice mournful. "You do not understand what you sought to own." The other priest murmured, "It was not a boy. It was a mirror. A punishment sent to reveal sins we refuse to confess." The merchants recoiled as though struck. A sudden boom echoed through the rotunda, faraway thunder that never produced rain. The priests departed without another word. And into that silence, the city's fear crystallized. Not only was Armand real, he was loose, unclaimed, uncontrolled, unconfined by law or faith or reason. In the following days, newspapers adopted a single repeated phrase: "The affair of the impossible boy." Officials urged calm while quietly doubling patrols. Planters preparing to travel into the city postponed their trips. Salon gatherings emptied. Churches filled. Mirrors were draped in cloth across entire neighborhoods. Superstitions multiplied. Do not walk alone near the river. Do not gaze too long at beautiful strangers. Do not dream of young men with perfect faces, for they might be dreaming back. In Trem, Celestine overheard a group of elderly women murmuring about old myths from before the Haitian Revolution. Tales of spirits born too beautiful. Spirits that punished cruelty not with violence, but by unraveling the soul of anyone who beheld them with impure desire. "Maybe he is one of them," one woman whispered. "A revenant of beauty. A mistake God allowed so we may see what we have become." Celestine's aunt nodded grimly. "He walks like judgment in bare feet." By the end of June, the city lived in a state of held breath. No one had seen Armand openly since the night Julian died. No body had been found. No witness could agree on his direction, his purpose, or his nature. But the fear remained. It lingered in alleys, in river mist, in flickering candles, in mirrors darkened beneath sheets. It threaded itself into prayers and nightmares. New Orleans had always been a city of beauty and rot, of music and mourning, but now it felt caught between 2 realities, one mortal and one touched by something infinitely more cruel. Julian's death was only the first ripple. The full storm had not yet come. It began with the bells, though no one could later agree which church had rung them. Some swore it was St. Louis Cathedral, its towers rising solemn and whitened against the dusk. Others insisted it came from St. Augustine in Trema, where the prayers of the living often mingled with the whispers of the dead. A few even claimed they heard the bells underwater, as if the river itself had told them from its silt-choked depths. But however it began, when the bells rang, every soul in New Orleans felt the vibration, not in their ears, but in the fragile place between heartbeat and breath. The city seemed to exhale all at once, and the storm finally began. The first true sighting came at nightfall on the last day of June. A midwife named Henriette Dupré was returning from the French market with a basket of figs when she passed the old batture. Fireflies drifted above the marshy ground. The cypresses swayed lightly, as if restless. She felt it before she saw it, cold, rising from the ground instead of the wind. A figure stood by the water, barefoot, still, luminous. Armand. He faced the river, his hands folded loosely behind him, as if contemplating a view only he could see. Henriette froze, clutching her basket to her chest until figs spilled into the mud. Slowly, with a grace so fluid it appeared unearthly, Armand turned his head. Their eyes met. Henriette fell to her knees before she realized her legs had given out. Tears streamed down her face, not from fear, something deeper. A sorrow so profound it felt like the echo of a grief older than her bones. Armand stepped toward her, his expression tender. "You should not look," he said softly. Henriette sobbed. "Why? What are you?" He stopped an arm's length away. The faint glow beneath his skin brightened, pulsing like a heartbeat. "A reminder." "Of what?" "That beauty," he murmured, "can be cruelty when placed in a world that knows only how to consume." Henriette reached trembling fingers toward him, not touching, only seeking warmth. "You didn't mean to hurt Julian?" "I hurt him only by being seen." "Why do you walk alone?" Armand's gaze drifted past her, into some distance no map could capture. "Because I have been many things in men's eyes. Angel, curse, temptation, punishment, and none of them are my choosing." Henriette whispered, "What are you really?" Armand blinked slowly. "Tired." Before she could speak again, a distant voice cried her name from the road. She turned instinctively, and when she looked back, he was gone. Not fled, not faded. Gone, as though the air had swallowed him whole. She ran home barefoot, leaving her shoes in the mud. By morning, half the city knew the story. By noon, fear had sharpened into something else. Anticipation. Something was building, like a pressure beneath floorboards. Camille Laroche felt it first. She woke to the sensation of someone standing at the foot of her bed. Her breath caught, but she did not open her eyes. She lay perfectly still, listening. Silence. Then, Camille. Her eyes flew open. Armand stood in her moonlit bedroom, illuminated from within, casting no shadow. His face was as perfect as she remembered, more perfect perhaps, but now sorrow clung to him like a second skin. Camille's voice trembled. "How did you come here?" "Doors don't matter," Armand said quietly. "Walls don't matter, mirrors don't matter." "What do you want?" she whispered. "For you to understand." He moved closer, so gently she felt no disturbance of air, only cold. "You have seen how men pursue beauty," Armand continued. "How they twist it, corrupt it, enslave it." Camille swallowed hard. "They would have enslaved you." "They tried." Armand tilted his head. "But slavery cannot hold what it cannot define." Camille forced herself upright. "Are you here to kill me?" Armand's expression broke, shattered like porcelain. "I do not kill." "But Julian killed himself." Camille gasped. "No, he... Armand shook his head slowly. "He looked at me. I looked at him, and all the lies he lived behind collapsed. He saw the weight of every life he sold. The beauty he coveted was only the reflection of his own rot." Camille trembled violently. "Then why come to me?" Armand reached out, not touching her, stopping just before his fingers met her skin. "Because you still hide behind glass." Camille flinched, as if struck. "Do not use mirrors as shields," he whispered. "They will only show you what you fear most." A gust of cold extinguished every candle in the room. Camille screamed, but when servants burst in moments later, she was alone. Celestine had not slept for 2 nights. Her dreams were filled with the same image, Armand walking across a surface that shifted between water and glass. When she woke, her pillow was damp with tears she could not explain. On the 3rd night, her aunt insisted she stay in the older woman's house. Celestine lay awake under a thin quilt, listening to the croaking of frogs and distant shouts from dock workers finishing their shift. Around midnight, her aunt shook her shoulder. "Child, wake." Celestine sat up. Her aunt's voice quivered. "He's outside." Celestine's heart froze. She rose, walked to the window, and parted the curtain with trembling fingers. Armand stood beneath the jasmine vines. He looked not at the house, but at her. Directly at her, as though the walls were made of fog. A soft knock sounded at the front door. Then another. Celestine whispered, "Auntie, what do I do?" "Do not answer." The knock grew softer, more patient, almost pleading. Celestine stepped backward, breathing fast. "Celestine," Armand's voice carried through the wood, impossibly, unmistakably. Her aunt seized her wrist. "He wants something from you, something he cannot take unless you offer it." "What?" Celestine whispered, terrified. "Recognition," her aunt breathed. "Someone who sees him as human." Celestine pressed both hands over her mouth, trembling. The knock came again, one soft tap, as gentle as a heartbeat. Then silence. Minutes later, when Celestine dared to look again, Armand was gone. But jasmine blossoms lay scattered on the ground where he had stood, glowing faintly in the moonlight. The climax came, inevitably, at the cathedral. Father Dupuis had grown increasingly pale and erratic over the days following Julien's death. His sermons were fragmented. His prayers shook with dread. Parishioners noticed he sometimes stared at the stained glass with terror, as though expecting it to shatter inward. And then, on a night thick with heat and thunder that refused to fall, Father Dupuis locked himself inside St. Louis Cathedral. Witnesses saw him drag heavy bolts across the doors. They heard him begin to chant. First Latin, then French, then something older. Just after midnight, a woman passing Jackson Square screamed. Light was pouring out of the cathedral windows, not warm candlelight, but a cold, bluish brilliance that flickered like lightning inside a glass coffin. People gathered, transfixed. The doors buckled. The bells began ringing themselves, one by one, wild, uncontrolled. And then a sound tore through the night. Singing, a voice so beautiful it hurt to hear. Armand's. It rose through the cathedral rafters like a lamentation not meant for human ears. The crowd fell silent. The doors blew open. And there, standing alone beneath the highest arch, was Armand. His skin blazed with cold light. His eyes shimmered with sorrow. Father Dupuis lay prostrate before him, weeping without sound, as though his voice had been taken. Armand stepped forward, his voice carried through the square. "I never asked to be worshipped." He descended the steps slowly. "I never asked to be feared." Camille, who had arrived breathless, shaken, felt herself drawn toward him despite every instinct for survival. "Do you want to know the truth?" Armand continued. The crowd leaned forward unconsciously. Armand's expression shifted. grief deepening into something devastating. I was made by human hands. A gasp rippled through the square. Camille staggered. Celestine, among the crowd, clutched her chest. Armand's voice broke as he spoke the next words. I am what happens when men try to create beauty instead of goodness. Silence. You called me angel. Curse. Judgment. Armand's gaze swept over them, luminous and mournful. But I am only the reflection of your own hunger. He raised his hands. The light dimmed. The bells fell silent. And the weight of his words settled over the city like the ash of a world burned clean. What you fear, Armand whispered, is not me. He looked directly at Camille. It is yourselves. The final candle inside the cathedral extinguished. The square plunged into darkness. And Armand vanished. Not one person saw him go. He was simply gone, leaving only silence. And fear, and the terrible understanding that the most beautiful boy ever sold in New Orleans was not divine, he was man-made. And that was the true horror. Dawn crept slowly over New Orleans that morning, as if reluctant to illuminate what had transpired in the square the night before. A thin haze clung to the riverfront, drifting over masts and brick chimneys like the breath of the city itself, uneven, pained, uncertain. The cathedral's bells hung motionless. No one dared ring them. For the first time in decades, Jackson Square stood empty at sunrise. Those who had witnessed Armand's final appearance, his radiance, his sorrow, his impossible disappearance, dispersed in a daze, returning to their homes like sleepwalkers. Their footsteps left no trace in the dust. Their voices refused to rise above whispers. The city's breath, once full of the ordinary sounds of mourning, was now taut with silence. The aftermath began with the newspapers. The Picayune published a hurried, contradictory article claiming that a disturbance of unknown origin had taken place at the cathedral. No mention of a boy, no mention of unnatural light, only vague references to crowd agitation and a rogue intruder. The editors received dozens of letters that day, some furious that the truth had been concealed, others begging the paper never to speak of it again. The Daily Delta went further. Cathedral incident linked to recent death, city authorities investigate. The article hinted at hysteria, hallucination, mass delusion. The editors insisted there was no evidence of supernatural activity, and that rumors of a luminous youth were exaggerations rooted in collective panic. But this cautious narrative faltered when witnesses began swelling the city's makeshift forums, taverns, markets, church steps, each one claiming to have seen the same impossible thing. A beautiful boy. A light not of this world. A voice that emptied the soul. A revelation that struck like divine thunder. For every person who mocked the story, 5 swore they had been there, and all spoke of the same words. I was made by human hands. Officials could not ignore such a chorus. Within 2 days, the mayor convened an emergency council meeting in the St. Louis Hotel. Planters, merchants, lawyers, priests, and a handful of officers occupied the long mahogany table. The tension in the room was a physical weight, settling over them as heavy as the humidity. The superintendent of police stood first. His voice cracked despite his attempts to maintain authority. We believe the boy responsible for the disturbance may be mentally unwell, or manipulated, or used in a scheme designed to destabilize public order. A politician scoffed. A single youth cannot destabilize a city. Then explain why 200 people described the same light, the superintendent snapped. The room fell into uneasy silence. Father Reynaud spoke next. He had aged visibly in recent weeks, his hair more silver, his eyes dimmer. What occurred in the cathedral was not the work of a demon, he said. Nor an angel, nor a spirit. It was a human tragedy, something created, something tampered with. By whom? A merchant demanded. Father Reynaud hesitated. There are whispers of experiments in Havana, of men who sought to perfect the human form, to sculpt beauty beyond mortal boundaries. A lawyer retorted. Experiments? You expect us to accept this fantasy? The priest met his gaze. You saw the boy. Was he not a fantasy made flesh? Several men shifted uncomfortably. Felix Laroche, seated near the end of the table, spoke for the first time. His voice wavered. I saw him, he said, and I tell you, his beauty was not natural, but his suffering was. No one answered. Camille Laroche arrived last. She swept into the room wearing black silk, every eye turning to her as though she carried judgment in her wake. She took her seat with the poise of a woman who understood power too deeply to fear it. Gentlemen, she began, you waste time. The question is not what he was. The question is what he revealed. A planter bristled. Madam, we are attempting to prevent further unrest. Unrest? Camille's voice sharpened. Look around you. The city already trembles, not because a boy glowed like a lantern, but because he showed us what we are. Do you truly believe a creature made by human ambition would not reflect human sins? Her gaze swept the room. You are afraid, she said softly, because he stripped away your illusions. The room erupted in arguments, shouting, denials, threats, but Camille remained composed, her expression a mask of ice. When the meeting adjourned, no conclusion had been reached, only fear. In Trem, Celestine found the aftermath unfolding in gentler, sadder ways. Her neighbors gathered in clusters outside the old houses, exchanging theories in Creole French and hushed tones. Some believed Armand had been a spirit forced into flesh. Some believed he was a message sent by ancestors angry with the city's sins. Others feared he was an omen of greater suffering to come. Children were told not to wander near the river. Women burned sage and hung charms above their doors. Men who had once scoffed at superstition now carried rosaries in their pockets. Celestine's aunt refused to leave the house. He is not gone, the old woman insisted. A soul like that does not vanish. It lingers. It watches. Celestine struggled to reconcile the fear that gripped the city with the sorrow she had glimpsed in Armand's expression. She walked through Treme in the evenings, searching the shadows between jasmine vines and gas lamps, hoping and dreading to see him again. She never did. But she felt him, in mirrors, in dreams, in the brief stillness before dawn. And she wondered whether anyone so beautiful could ever truly disappear. The legal aftermath was swift and quiet. Julien Desmarais' estate was seized by the city pending investigation. Clerks combed through his documents with trembling hands. When they found the incomplete bill of sale for Armand, they debated burning it. Ultimately, they locked it away instead, labeling the file Unverified Manifest. But every man who looked upon it felt the same chill. A perfectly drawn name, Armand. No surname, no origin, no classification. A human being without category. A mistake no one wished to acknowledge. The state of Louisiana issued a formal statement. The individual known as Armand is hereby declared missing. Citizens are advised not to approach unfamiliar youths matching his description. Unfamiliar youths. As if there could ever be another like him. As summer pressed onward, New Orleans attempted to resume its rhythms. Markets reopened, music returned to the streets. Even the cathedral resumed its masses, though the bells remained oddly reluctant to ring. Yet something had changed. The wealthy no longer boasted about their acquisitions. They spoke more softly, more cautiously, as if afraid to draw attention. Priests delivered sermons on humility and temptation. Whispers circulated through the slave pens, rumors of a boy who had undone his master with a single look. And in quiet corners of the city, people said a phrase they never dared speak aloud before. Perhaps beauty is not meant to be owned. Camille retreated into herself. Her servants often found her standing before mirrors with a cloth in her hands, unsure whether to cover them or reveal them. She attended Mass daily, though she spent more time kneeling in silent contemplation than in prayer. In the months that followed, she withdrew from society altogether. Her mansion became a museum of shadows. Some claimed she spoke to someone unseen in the late hours. Others said she wept at night. But when asked what she had seen in Armand's eyes, she gave only one answer. He was everything we wanted, and everything we should never have. Father Dupuy eventually recovered his voice, but sermons never came easily to him again. He aged rapidly, his hair turning white within weeks. Parishioners said he often paused mid-prayer, glancing toward the cathedral's high arches as though expecting light to descend again. He never spoke of Armand, but late at night he was seen sweeping the cathedral steps, humming a melody that no human throat should recall, Armand's last song. As for the city itself, New Orleans learned to walk again, though the ground felt different beneath its feet. The people learned to blink away beauty, to distrust perfection, to fear what gleamed too brightly in a dark world. Some claimed Armand still walked the riverbank at night, his feet never touching mud. Others swore he moved through crowds unseen, his glow now dimmed to allow him peace. Most tried to forget him. Few succeeded. For the wound he left in the city was not carved in flesh or stone. It lived in memory, and in the quiet understanding that the greatest horrors are not always grotesque. Sometimes they are beautiful. History would not remember Armand. Not officially. No public record, no census entry, no burial notice would bear his name. In the decades that followed, scholars and archivists searching for documents from the summer of 1852 would find only scattered clues, whispers preserved in private letters, abrupt pauses in personal diaries, and an unusual cluster of unsigned editorials warning that perfect beauty is the most treacherous illusion offered to mankind. None mentioned him directly. All pointed to him nonetheless. New Orleans moved on, or pretended to, but the wound he carved lingered like a thin, invisible scar stretching across every neighborhood, every parlor, every riverbank. Some wounds heal outwardly while festering quietly within the bone. His was one of them. And though time swallowed the details, the aftershocks shaped the city in ways no one would ever fully acknowledge. Trials were held, because order demanded spectacle. Julien Desmarais' estate, left without an heir, became the centerpiece of a legal struggle between creditors, rival brokers, and distant cousins eager to claim the fortune. The court convened in a room so humid that the judge removed his robe twice during the proceedings. Testimony was contradictory and unnerving. A clerk insisted Julien had been disturbed for weeks before his death, claiming he'd spoken of a radiant boy who revealed men's sins. A merchant laughed dismissively, stating Julien had succumbed to the usual degeneracies of wealthy men who read too many Gothic novels. A priest attempted to quote scripture until the judge interrupted him with a weary wave of the hand. A housemaid merely whispered, "He stared at mirrors as if something stared back." The final verdict: natural causes. Because no court wished to declare that a broker of flesh had died of fear. The bill of sale bearing Armand's name was quietly destroyed, not publicly burned, not archived, simply disappeared into the hands of a clerk who later left the city altogether. His diary entry for that night contained a single line: I have seen the signature of something God did not draft. No journalist investigated further. No politician raised the matter in chambers. New Orleans had learned an old lesson anew. Some truths are too dangerous to look at directly. Newspaper headlines shifted within weeks. The Crescent published a long piece declaring the entire incident a case of collective hysteria caused by extreme heat. The Picayune printed a scathing editorial mocking the human tendency to invent angels when overwhelmed by guilt. The Daily Delta quietly retracted its mention of a luminous figure, replacing it with the phrase, unidentified intruder. Only a small column in the city's French-language paper offered a hint of dissent. Certains miroirs montrent plus qu'ils ne devraient. Some mirrors show more than they ought. Most readers ignored it. Those who understood folded the page away and prayed. In the Treme district, life returned to its rhythms, the drumming on Sunday afternoons, the laughter spilling from porch steps, the scent of gumbo drifting between houses. Yet, beneath the surface, a subtle shift endured. People spoke less openly of spirits. Dreams were discussed only with trusted family. Mirrors were polished more carefully and covered more quickly at night. Celestine continued her work at the dressmaking shop, though she flinched whenever a stranger's shadow crossed the window. Customers asked her why she seemed quieter. She only offered a polite smile. She never told them that she still felt Armand's presence at the edges of sleep. Some nights, she dreamed of him walking along a river that reflected no stars, not glowing anymore, just a young man with sorrow in his steps. A young man who turned his head as if listening for the name she would not call. Her aunt urged her to forget him. "You owe nothing to a creature made by the pride of men," the old woman insisted. "Let him drift back into the shadows he came from." But Celestine could not forget the look on his face, the look of someone pleading for something he could not name. And in quiet moments, she wondered whether anyone as lonely as he had been could ever truly be forgotten. Camille Laroche did not recover. She withdrew from every glittering haunt of Creole society. Her once famous salons dissolved into memory. Friends visited at first, then stopped when they realized Camille no longer wished to be consoled. She spent long hours sitting before her parlor mirror, a vast, gilded thing nearly as tall as she was, studying her reflection with a surgical intensity. Servants sometimes heard her speaking softly, as though negotiating with the person on the other side of the glass. One evening, her maid Claudette found her seated before the mirror in complete silence, expression hollow. "Madame," the maid whispered. Camille did not look away from her own reflection. "He was created to be perfect," she said faintly. "But perfection is a trap. It holds nothing. It gives nothing. It survives only by consuming the impulses of those who witness it." Claudette trembled. "Should I fetch the doctor?" "No," Camille whispered. "There is no cure for seeing the truth." She lived another 7 years. She was never again photographed. When she died, household staff discovered every mirror in the mansion draped in black crepe. Every mirror except one. The parlor mirror stood uncovered, shining dimly in the dawn light. A servant claimed she felt a cold breeze pass her shoulder as she covered it. She never returned to the house. Father Dupuis resigned his position quietly and left the city. Some said he traveled north, others that he boarded a ship and never looked back. Those who had heard him hum Armand's unearthly melody in the cathedral's empty nave suspected the truth. He fled not from the boy, but from the knowledge that faith had no language to describe him. And what of Armand? He was seen twice more. Or perhaps those sightings were only the city's attempt to stitch closure onto an unhealed wound. The first sighting came from a fisherman near Algiers Point, who claimed he saw a young man walking along the water at dawn. He didn't glow anymore, the fisherman said. He looked tired, as if the world had worn him down. The man blinked once, and the boy was gone. The second sighting came from a girl on Dauphine Street, who told her mother she dreamed of a beautiful youth brushing dust from his hands, as though finished with a great labor. "He smiled at me," the girl said. "Not the smile of an angel, the smile of someone finally free." Her mother slapped her and forbade her to speak of it again. After that, no more stories emerged. But in the years that followed, small curiosities persisted. A mirror cracking down its center in an empty room. A candle extinguishing itself during a whispered confession. A young woman waking with tears on her face, unable to remember why. Some said Armand had dissolved into the world like morning fog. Some said he had become a ghost. Some said he had been reclaimed by whatever force made him. Others believed the simplest, most human explanation. He ran. He disappeared into the wilderness, into the anonymity of men who seek only to stop being seen. If a soul as exposed as his wished for peace, who could blame him? Years later, when the Civil War swept through Louisiana and the city's old power structures cracked, a few older residents whispered that perhaps Armand had been an omen. A warning of what happens when a society builds its foundations on the bodies of others, then dares to craft beauty from their suffering. And what is an omen, after all, if not a truth delivered too soon? Some said they were relieved he vanished. Others said the city still owed him an apology. A rare few dared confess they missed him. Because for all the fear he inspired, Armand had shown them something no one else had. The unbearable weight of the truth reflected back at them. In time, Armand became a ghost story. In time, he became a cautionary tale. In time, he became nothing at all. But occasionally, once every decade or so, a report surfaced of a boy with impossible beauty walking barefoot along a southern riverbank. Each time, the witness claimed the same detail, that the boy looked both sorrowful and relieved, as though he finally understood he belonged to no one, and never had. And in that ambiguous silhouette, the city remembered the truth it tried to bury. The most terrifying thing Armand revealed was not himself. It was New Orleans. What it worshipped, what it traded, what it excused, what it feared, and what it saw in the mirror. So, what do you believe? Was this truth unveiled or buried to protect the powerful? Write your theory in the comments. And if you want us to keep digging into America's darkest forgotten histories, like this video, subscribe, and join us next week as we descend deeper into the shadows of the past, where beauty, brutality, and secrets are rarely what they seem.